real pleasure today to introduce our fellow member, David Trickett, president of the Iliff School of Theology. I've had the pleasure in the last 2 years of serving on the board of directors of this institution. And you know, the first time I heard David talk, I thought, here's a visionary, here's a leader that needs support. And that's the reason I joined the board. And it has come to pass. I've never seen a person provide more leadership to an organization than David has to Iliff. It's not only is the staff outstanding and the faculty very talented, but we have a very good board of directors, and it's quite a privilege to serve on that board. Iliff has become a leader nationally in online education. They're the first Methodist School of Theology that does online work, and we also have a business-to-business initiative that we're going to reach out to the community and work with business organizations and show them how theology, how faith can improve the productivity of their workforce. There's a lot going on at Iliff, and it's a pleasure to be there. And I won't say more. You probably read David's bio in the keyway, but it's a pleasure to welcome you, David. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Don't even dream of putting a title up there. The title of these remarks has changed about 5 times, and it was created by committee, which is why it changed 5 times. So just to give you a general sense, what you've seen in writing is not, in fact, exactly what I'm going to talk about, but I'll tell you about that in a moment. I am very pleased to be here. I am pleased to be embraced, if you will, by more than a handful of trustees, and in one case, spouse of trustee, but also fellow members. This month, we were wrestling with how to provide a focus on education each of the weeks except for next week's ball game. Though I could make a case for how education and baseball are related. An acquaintance of mine now dead, Barb Giamatti, traded in the job of being president of Yale University to become the commissioner of Major League Baseball. So he actually saw the virtue of sport as related to education. We don't need to say more on that. But as we wrestled with people who would speak to us about education in Colorado, it turns out that a number of really good presenters were all taking their vacation in July. I'm taking mine in August. So I'm very pleased to be here with you. Here's what I want to talk with you about. It is generally what it means to understand spiritually grounded higher education in this state as a largely unexploited resource, an untapped asset. Those of you who are uncomfortable in hearing that topic discussed, maybe turn on your iPod now. I didn't think it was very useful to do research, or at least not much, or in fact any, on this topic. I've been living here a little over 5 years, and what you're going to hear is a lived witness from the field and what it means to work in the world of education that touches the hearts and lives, minds, and hands of people who are struggling for purpose and meaning, whether they're in corporate suites or they're driving school buses. I serve on the board of a national association of 122 private educational institutions across the United States. There are 2 of them in Colorado, the University of Denver and the Iowa School of Theology. One of the things we talk about on that board, just to give you a sense that what's happening in Colorado is reflected around the nation, is what is the significant differentiator between private education over against public when it comes to anything having to do with value understood in a number of ways. For example, this is what parents, anybody here recently paid tuition in a private institution for anyone? Okay. So parents and other, how does one say, fiscally responsible parties may sometimes wonder why I'm paying $50,000 a year for a good education in a private institution, when in fact I could be paying $12,000 a year in a public institution, or something functionally like that. So the answer to the question, what's the differentiator for private education, not just theological, but private education, is that it has to be about much more than economics. It has to be about the deeper purpose of education that private institutions have the opportunity often to address in ways that are not affected in the same way by legislatures and other public sector pressures as are the public institutions. It has to do with shaping character. It has to do with forming people who can work in a way that the now constant whitewater that we see ahead of us in society more broadly and in the organizations into which we will find ourselves going to work are going to see going forward. So within that arena, I'm only talking about private higher education. Here in Colorado, I've noticed something that I want to share with you. There are at least 3 strands, there may be more, but I've noticed at least 3 strands of private education that have some kind of connection with spiritual roots. Some of the roots are deep, some of the roots are present and vibrant, and some are best or most charitably termed historic. So here's a high-level characterization that I would not want any attorney to mishear. We have, as one strand, represented institutions such as Colorado Christian University and Denver Seminary. They, from my perspective, represent what I'd like to call relatively more traditional and evangelically focused Christian witness. We have schools like Regis University and the Iliff School of Theology, which represent deeply venerable, that is to say, historic traditions that are, in fact, finding it essential to be progressive and open in embracing the wider world with all its messiness. And then we have some really good institutions like Colorado College and the University of Denver that stand on firm spiritual foundations, and yet those commitments have taken a much more public expression over the last several decades, if not century. Some of you may know this, not all of you probably do, but the legal name of the University of Denver today, as I'm standing here, is Colorado Seminary. That hails back to the day in the 19th century when what is now Iliff and what is now DU were one school. This diversity of streams represents a diversity of worldviews, and that diversity has consequences, as it does if you're part of a congregation, or you're in a corporation, or you're in a law firm, where issues of meaning and deep value have to be addressed in the way you execute your organization's strategy. One of the most significant of those consequences is that differing worldviews have long had challenges in embracing one another. Many of us, for example, may have a hard time affirming more than in a cosmetically pleasant way otherness that differs pretty noticeably from our own position or self-understanding or matrix of values that we hold dear. And often, because we're human, we vilify those whose views differ from our own. Now, you know that this has made its way into the wider public arena, particularly at the time of elections. No matter what kind of jurisdiction, whenever we get into an electoral cycle, divisiveness and the erosion of civil discourse seems to be pretty prevalent.